we have a recurring guest, a very important individual. He's the head of strategy at the Canadian Lending Association. Tal Schwartz, how are you doing today?
Good, Jeff. Thanks for having me. I love being introduced as a very important person.
Yes, sir. We see strategy just kind of oozing out of your pores, man. You're thinking about it. I see it. So what's going on in the environment today, in the lending environment in Canada? Tell us about it.
So obviously it's been a crazy year in the lending space. The CLA, the Canadian Lenders Association, it's a pretty big group. So we represent quite a few different credit sectors. Mm-hmm. But I think the snapshot that might be interesting for today's conversation is just kind of the broad differences between the consumer and the small business lending environment. So I think the story of the year through COVID was how well consumer credit performed. So our government had a very extensive relief package. And consumers use that to pay down debt. So a lot of the subprime sector in Canada is performing very, very well. Lenders like GoEasy, publicly listed subprime consumer lender, is trading at all-time highs. So that's one really interesting part of the story. On the small business side, we're starting to hopefully exit the worst part of COVID. Obviously, small business got hit incredibly hard during COVID. Most urban centers in Canada still have some sort of lockdown measure. I'm here in Toronto. All the restaurants and bars and corner shops are closed. So hopefully we'll start to see a bounce back in the spring. And broadly, there've also been some really interesting trends in lending in Canada. So a lot of M&A over the last few months. Mm-hmm. Companies, particularly in the point of sale lending space, have seen a lot of action. So the Canadian company called PayBright was recently acquired by a firm, which then went public about a week later and has done really well in the public markets. Mm-hmm. Another point of sale lender, Flexity, was acquired by Curo, another U.S. publicly listed consumer lender. And we're seeing a lot of international firms in the point of sale space start to enter Canada as well. So companies like Sezzle and Afterpay are starting to build a pretty big presence here. So there's a little bit of a snapshot for you.
I appreciate that. Not that I'm upset with you guys, but it seemed like Canada pushed all of this cold weather to Texas. And what I used to take, for granted is now something that I long for. I spent a week in my house with 4 kids and my wife. We survived. There's a couple of moments of like The Shining. So we had to get outside and get away from it. But what I really walked away from that experience was I need a shot of tequila. I need a sunburn. And I need some live music for my soul. And, all of what you just described with the local merchants trying to get back to some sort of normalcy is so critical for all of us. Mm-hmm. So what?
Yeah,
go ahead.
It's obviously a pretty delicate dance that, the federal government has to play. Obviously balancing public interest, public safety concerns, but also, the small business economy. The vast majority of jobs in Canada and in the United States are small business jobs. So, there are a lot of competing interests there, and hopefully, as things start to warm up and some of that cold weather goes away, we're going to start to see some sort of return to normalcy.
Mm-hmm. And so are the primary trends that you're seeing in the Canadian Lending Association that you guys are seeing is kind of that embedded lending situation, or are you guys seeing any other type of lending trends currently?
Yeah, there's always like a lot of interesting stuff happening here. I think the one trend that I've been paying pretty close attention to recently is around credit building. So credit building has kind of always been the job of fintechs. So typically, a way that a consumer could go and build their credit is by taking out something called a savings loan or credit building loan, which is, I kind of like to describe it as sort of like a fake loan. So you go through the process of taking out credit and paying it back on time. And as you paid back on time, those trade lines are reported to the credit bureaus, and you can start building up your credit history. And then at the end of that, of the term, once it matures, you get back your initial investment minus any servicing fees. So this is a product that's existed for a while, and there are a few large players in Canada that offer this. Refresh Financial is a big one. Marble, Climb. One of those companies, Refresh, was actually just acquired recently, so there's been a lot of focus now on the credit building space. And now we're even starting to see banks get into it as well. So Coho, which is Canada's largest challenger bank, is now offering their own credit building loans. And outside of that specific product, you're seeing some pretty cool stuff in the credit building space as well. From a policy perspective, something that the CLA has always tried to push is including some of that alternative credit data, or like non-traditional credit data, to the bureau. So that's like, I pay my rent every day or every month on time. I want that reported to Equifax. I pay my utilities, my phone bill on time. I want that reported to TransUnion. So that's been a policy issue that we've been trying to push. And then in the States, and if I had to put money on it, I'm sure in Canada we're going to see this pretty soon too. Fintechs creating ways for consumers to self-report alternative data. So not just your rent and utilities, but also your Netflix subscription, and getting those sent to the credit bureaus to show good behavior to try to rebuild and accelerate credit.
I like that. I mean, I think, and educating your borrowers, right? You really have the opportunity to instill in them or to educate them on the ways to behave with credit, right? And I think that's so critical these days when you're wanting to offer these terms outside of paying for a product, in full. Really modifying their behavior or rewarding that behavior accordingly, I think is very, very important. We all are now accustomed to the Amazon experience. Companies like Affirm give you the ability to acquire something very quickly with 3 to 7 payments, and doing so in amount of time that they're converting that sale for any of the retailers that they're working with them. And I think that's very unique. I think lenders have to traditionally walk that fine line of getting enough information to understand the risk, and then also doing so without boring the borrower to death from KYC perspective and all of that. So it's a very fine line that I love the direction we're heading, and how fintech's kind of leading the education of the lending space. I think it's cool.
For sure. Yeah, no, and you bring up a good point there. I mean, a lot of the innovation that we see in fintech lending is about improving the borrower experience. So, not bogging down a borrower with a bunch of wet signatures and having to, push paper documents to verify income or employment, and really, accelerating that process for the borrower. But, when you reduce barriers and improve the customer experience, you also have to balance that with, like you said, borrower education, and making sure that yes, it's easy for borrowers to access credit, but that there are expectations that come along with that, and as a borrower, you need to be aware of what your obligations are, and as a lender, you have an obligation to go and educate your customers.
100%. Are there any strategic initiatives or strategies you're working on for 2021? Yeah.
So, I mean, the perennial issue in Canada is pushing ahead open banking. So here it's referred to as consumer-directed finance. So over the holidays, the federal government ran a few roundtable consultations with a few different industry groups that the CLA participated in. And we're starting to finally see a little bit of movement towards some sort of an open banking framework where consumers can actually own their own banking and transaction information and have true data portability between financial services and institutions. And then more specific to the CLA, we've launched over the last 2 quarters a data exchange initiative with all the alternative lenders in Canada, specifically to share information on suspicious actors. So the reason why that's so critical and so important for a borrower is a lot of the reasons why a borrower needs to pay high APR is because of bad actor activity. And a lender needs to go and balance the risk of a default or lending to a fraudulent borrower in their overall APRs that they offer. So by creating a data exchange across Canada, across credit sectors, we're hopefully going to start preventing some of that bad activity from taking place. And the result is going to be a reduction of interest rates to responsible borrowers, and more broadly, just creating efficiencies across the lending sector.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I like that. Visibility is really good. I think that's the advantage that the traditional institutions have, is a very low cost of funds, and that any of the fintechs that want to play in the space have to consider what that funding cost is if they don't have a depository source. But then, those fraudulent players, one bad apple can spoil the bunch, right? So how do we have very good visibility into protecting against that as best as possible? I like that a lot. That's cool. But are there any, and you had mentioned some fintechs, and I greatly appreciate that, but are there any cool fintechs that are kind of catching your attention today, or doing anything that you're fond of, anything along those lines?
Yeah, tons. So another area that we pay quite close attention to is the earned wage access space. Mm-hmm. So this is a kind of pseudo consumer credit product where essentially if I'm an employee and I get paid on a bi-weekly cycle, and I've worked, let's say, 10 days out of the 14, an earned wage access provider would allow me to take out 10 days of salary before I wait till day 14 to get the entire amount. And the reason why that is so important is because I might have a phone bill that comes out on the 12th day, or I have to pay my rent on the 13th day. And if I have to wait another 1, 2, 3 days until I collect my pay for that period, I might go into overdraft and then have to pay $250 in fees. So the earned wage access space in Canada is really developing, and also kind of emerging as a response or an alternative to the payday space, which is very important. Mm-hmm. So a few folks in that area, Borwell Boost, they have a product in that space that they launched last year. Zayzoon as well has a really interesting product in earned wage access. And we're starting to see the payroll providers themselves actually get into the space as well, which is natural, right? I mean, they already have a captive customer base of folks that are accessing payment benefits. So by offering earned wage access, it's just another value add. And it's kind of something that is sort of being mirrored in the small business space as well. Over the last few years, you've started to see ERP systems, accounting systems start offering lending services as well. So that, like, for example, would be like Shopify Capital, QuickBooks Capital, Wave Capital. These are all accounting platforms or back office ERP systems that have so much data on their clients that they're very efficiently able to go and offer credit to those clients. So, and this is something that you kind of mentioned at the top of the conversation as well, this idea of embedded lending. And you're seeing quite a lot of that, and I would imagine we're going to see quite a lot more this year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's going to be a hot space for a long time. I mean, I think there are, without naming any institutions, I think that there were some large institutions in the U.S. that figured that out a long time ago, and until recently were the dominant player. I think that they're going to experience some more competition than ever before with the likes of Affirm and other organizations that are really playing in that space. I like that. What kind of trade shows, what type of virtual events are you doing? I think we've got something scheduled for Thursday. You want to talk about that at all?
Yeah. So the CLA and TurnKey is hosting an online roundtable this Thursday, where we've invited a few fintech lenders from the Canadian space and some that also operate in the United States. And we're going to talk about digital trends and predictions for the year. And it's going to be a very interesting discussion. So if you're around on Thursday, please tune in.
Mm-hmm. And I've heard this word a couple of times, and I'm still trying to understand it 100%. But I'm hearing this word, banking as a service. Have you heard that before? And how would you define that?
Sure. I think, depending on who you ask, you might get a different answer. But there's a huge new crop of service providers that are providing infrastructure as a service. And what that is essentially what that means is it's now easier than ever to go and start a digital bank, to start a lending fintech. And it's largely due to all these infrastructure providers that are kind of offering the nuts and bolts of creating a fintech without you having to go and create your own core banking system, for example. So banking as a service is kind of a broad category, but there's a lot of really exciting innovation there, and it's really driving the growth of the industry.
Very cool. Very cool. Did you learn anything critical in 2020, or just wear a mask and keep your head down?
I learned a lot about online chess. That was probably the biggest takeaway from 2020. Very cool. And lending-wise, building out this data exchange that I mentioned, Lenders API, learned a ton about data privacy, database integrations, API development, and how lenders can exchange data in real time. So that was a bit of a learning curve for me.
Fantastic. Well, Tal, it's always a pleasure. We look forward to having you again on Thursday. And if any of our audience has any questions for TurnKey Lender, please reach out. Or if you have any questions for Tal and his organization, he is the Chief Strategy Officer. So somehow, some way, he could probably figure out how to be a resource for you. Thank you, Tal, for your time.